where was I? Okay, so let's talk about the OCD that plagued me my whole life. Now, OCD is something that when you hear the word, the acronym OCD, you think immediately you have. I know it's the consensual propaganda around it that's giving so many people the misconstrue it, the idea that OCD is actually just all about perfectionism and reorganizing things in symmetry. But that's only a small part of it. I'm going to get into that also in a second. OCD is none of that. OCD is not a perfectionist problem, nor is it the inability to actually get certainty of symmetry. OCD is in fact it's a thought disorder. There's actually speculation that OCD might not actually be an anxiety disorder, so that's also something completely diverted or adjunct from the general sense that people have. The reason it is the case that OCD is primarily a thought disorder, that means that the thoughts themselves are bothersome. You know how when you picture somebody with schizophrenia, that person is bothered by hallucinations, visual and auditory hallucinations, sometimes tactile hallucinations. That same thing happens to somebody with OCD, but it's a thought-based thing. So when you picture or depicturate somebody with schizophrenia, you imagine somebody who's bothered by thoughts, essentially, right? Hallucinations, visual, tactile, auditory. In the case of OCD, they have the same problem. Somebody with OCD also struggle with thoughts, but the thoughts themselves aren't actual representations, they are inner dialogues. I would say OCD at the latter stage is, at the former stage at least, is much more benign. So many people with OCD in the general state can function. Few people in the OCD, it's kind of a gap, it's a distribution, of course, like with anything else, with any other illness, but OCD is the same thing. So with OCD, there's a distribution as well that happens. And in my case, I was born when I was about 40 years old. I was extremely just harassed by thoughts of it sounds silly to you, maybe you can relate, maybe you can relate, but I was extremely harassed by thoughts of getting glasses. Like I didn't want the thought to me that my eyes aren't right completely just consumed my life. Like I was extremely just I was so obsessed about engrossed by this feeling essentially that my eyes has to be right. So oftentimes I was taken to all my parents would take me to the optometrists or the opticians to actually check my eyes. And as such, they would obviously always come back with almost a frustration that they couldn't convert me. My eyes were perfectly right. I always believed that something was wrong with them. So the same thing that many people would put true to symmetry obsessions is something I felt in regards to my eyes, where everything had to be kind of right and everything had to be picture perfect to a T. And that's something that throughout my life I didn't know what OCD was. I didn't know what it really was, but essentially I wasn't formally diagnosed with OCD. Maybe I was in my former life, former years, at least when I was younger. But when I've noticed later was that I had representation characteristics of obsessive compulsive disorder. That's exactly what it is, and that was my issue throughout my life that I struggled with, and all throughout my teen years, and especially my adolescence and my late 20s, my later adolescent years, my essentially my adult years, well, my median adult years, as I could potentially say, when I was in my mid 20s, I was absolutely plagued by. I was absolutely plagued by OCD. I was actually plagued by a more subform of OCD known as hyperawareness or somatic OCD forms that is much more lesser known form of OCD. So it's not a flagship form or a breached form that many people think is characteristically OCD, but yet it is also a manifestation of OCD in the same way that any other form of it is. However, my form was much more severe. I mean, if you actually check back to my old videos, you realize that I did make a video that I dedicated to hyperawareness OCD. This is basically where you become aware of your own body, and it's where if you recognize meditation practices, you would see that most meditation practices are centered around your breathing or centered around paying attention to your body. With hyper awareness OCD, it's almost like it catches on to the exact same thing with mindfulness or meditation. But the difference with the thought of your breathing, the thought of being aware of yourself becomes bothersome, where you have an aversion to it, you have a reticence to that thought, and you're basically trying locations to get away from the thought. So the difference between that and general meditation, of course, is where general meditation gives you the object of meditation as you're breathing. In hyper awareness OCD, it's like it's getting hijacked. I think that's the best way to put it. Where the mindfulness of the mindfulness essentially gets hijacked. That was when I moved to Australia when I was around 17 years of age. I have first got a brush of hyper awareness OCD where I started being aware of my itching, and the moment that I thought about itching, like my whole body would itch, and I couldn't. I didn't have insomnia or anything by that time. Insomnia was always kind of the demon in the rough. Like I remember that throughout my life, I was always kind of stressed about what if I would stop sleeping. These thoughts would always kind of harass me, but it never got an actual. It never really. The closest it came when I was around the age of 22, when I also lied in bed and I noticed my eyes, but I thought about because I had the blinking obsession and swallowing obsession, I couldn't stop thinking about swallowing and blinking, and I was like, oh my god, I'm thinking about swallowing and blinking. I will never stop, and I just fell asleep, and it never really bothered me ever since of course, the start of this year. But to go back to exactly Okay, so I gave you guys a bit of a prelude to exactly what my OCD is like. I think I wanted to give you guys the exact prelude and the exact preface to this because I think it's absolutely mandatory to understand why this manifested in the way it did, so that you guys understand what happened and my, the specific situation with my specific habituation that I'm currently struggling with. Now, that's hyper awareness OCD that's been plaguing me throughout the very major part of my life, and it essentially got into this point where I struggled to keep jobs, of course, because I was always hyper aware of myself. So I would go into a job and I would really, really struggle, especially sales jobs that I really struggled with because I mean, when I think about job hopping, I always think about my hyper awareness OCD. It becomes like a peculiarity. It's like a sensation that I would never stop. If I think back to my early 20s, part of my early 20s was subversed in this in this castrate of hyper awareness OCD. Like it's now a feature of my life and my youth. It's like that cardinal feature of my life and my youth that I would always remember as part of something that I struggled with. Like I would never be able to divorce that from my youth. I can only think to being plagued with OCD throughout my youth that it's going to if I ever were to overcome that, it's crazy. If I ever were to overcome OCD, it's like always going to be part of something was rotten in the state of Denmark at some point in my life, and it's like I'm always going to be thinking back to that OCD as part of my youth because it was such a large part of my life that I would never be able to fully disengage that from my memory bank. Anyways, basically, the reason I'm making this video is because something happened to me at the start of this year 2024, and it was a major thing that still leaves me with completely just behest with lots of worries, and lots of what if thoughts. Something that's not good for OCD, by the way, and something that's truly not good for anybody to suffer from, but I suffer from it right now. Now, I want to go back to the start of the beginning of this year, 2024, as we know, like New Year's Eve 2024, New Year's Day 2024. Okay, um, I don't really want to give too much of a backstory because I think it's gonna bore of you. But it's short. It's just like I'm struggling with insomnia. I'm struggling with pretty much treatment-resistant insomnia since the start of this year. It's becoming very aggressive, especially since the mid part of this year. The former part of this year was extremely aggressive. I would say it was very vernacular and sacrilegious, to the point where at the first 2 weeks in this year, I literally didn't sleep at all for around 2 hours a night, and that was around the fifth night. I must add, that means that I lost 5 full nights of sleep. That means that I can't remember which day, but by Friday in the first week, I can't. Yeah, it was the fifth, I believe. It must have been Monday then a Sunday. It was the fifth around or 5 days in New Year's, and it was Friday, and I remember like I lost like five full. I was extremely sleep deprived, and I was actually starting to hallucinate back then. I was physically starting to hallucinate, and I had tactile hallucination. I was starting to shake. Um, I also saw flickerings of light and stuff. It was really, really crazy. And I was at my business. I was typing away, and I just at that point I just noticed like something is really really wrong. I have to find help. Soon I realized that the help available were sleep clinics. The sleep clinics would cost me an arm and leg, and we just realized, I'm not gonna go to a sleep clinic. We tried to research drugs like essentially medications, benzodiazepines. I've tried a benzodiazepine, it didn't do anything. It didn't help me, so I eventually realized I'm pretty much treatment resistant. No, none of the interventions that I was being essentially being promoted or promised actually worked for me, nor did it actually. It just gave me negative side effects. So there was nothing in any of the intervention that I saw that was somewhat praiseworthy or admirable. All of these interventions, without any exception, there was no intervention I could really, apart from nootropics and apart from health diet, that I could really point at and say, well, this thing was really the game changer for me and my insomnia. So to kind of forward strike is, I'm just going to quickly battering ram a blitzkrieg back, into the future. Of course, I want to kind of stretch the time a bit longer to give you guys a bit of a glimpse of what exactly happened. But long story short, I just kept wrestling with insomnia. I essentially made a suicide video where I was very, very close to killing myself. It was the second week. I made an official suicide note on the second week of this year, and I sobbed during that video. I physically couldn't get my words out because I was very, very close to killing myself at that point. There was 2 nights that luckily I fell asleep just after that point, but I was planning that night to walk out and hang myself. I want to say that this is a trigger warning. This is a very, very deep video. If you're very sensitive, maybe you should just click away. This is just going to be a picture of my life. So I feel I have the right to basically tell and expose about my life. Just like anyone else can write about their lives, I have the right also to say, especially since I'm treatment resistant, I've all rights to essentially blitz forward into YouTube and create videos and narratives about my pains and my raw wins. I feel I have all rights to be able to do that. If someone's sensitive to that, I think they should just click away. So I'm gonna say there's a bit of a caveat emptor. Of course, I don't want to provoke anybody here. You have to probably click away if you feel like it. But this is just what happened to me. I was in the first 2 weeks. It was absolute hell. I was physically hallucinating. I was so sleep deprived. My anxiety didn't allow me to sleep. I didn't know what I was going to doing. I thought this is pretty much it for me. I thought I'm never going to be able to sleep again. Um, I've also learned during that time that this is one of the worst, outcomes that mental health can have is essentially to rob you sleep. If you think about the worst thing that could happen to you is something that could rob your sleep, something that would give you no chance of recovery. That's probably the worst that your mental health could get, and that's exactly what happened to me. I've realized at that point that my mental health was one of the worst in the world. Not in this city, not even in the country, in the world, literally. I realized at that point that my mental health, my OCD, was one of the most rancid, territorially aggressive, and ravenous conditions in the world. Um, I couldn't, it was undeniably true at that point and pertinent at that point that that was the case for me. And I knew, like, even now, that I had to do a lot to be able to get to this point. Like, it's not just as if, oh, the OCD, the insomnia has, is evaded or anything. Like, of course it's still there. I've had to do a lot. I've had to do a lot of research, a lot of physical labor, cognitive labor. I had to play chess with my mind, literally, just to calm it down. I was at a war for the last 10 months to be able to get to the point where I can actually speak and make a video about it. You can understand I still struggle with sleep deprivation. So every night I go into the night, it's not as austere as it was at the beginning, because of course it's a lot better. I'm not as sleep deprived as I was. I was able to actually provide or at least include segments of sleep. Um, and time, it's especially during time management during my first phase, I was really able to train myself to sleep earlier, and thus I made up for segments of loss of sleep loss. So I mean, of course, I'm a lot better right now. But during the first 2 weeks, I couldn't even string together a proper sentence, let alone think about making a video. So of course, I'm a lot better now, but during the first 2 weeks, I couldn't do this. Like in the first 2 weeks, I literally struggled with pain, anxiety. I thought literally this is going to be the end of my life. I'm going to physically have to end it or, shove a spear down my carotid to stop this pain because that's what I want to tell you guys is this is how bad mental health can get. This is how bad it can get. It can get to the point where you have no option. And I must say, at least boast about it and say, well, I've survived this, but pretty much for the worst part. But you know what's worse to me is that I've learned that there really is no help available for severe mental health. If you get to this point where there are red flags. If you're a kid, you're suffering from OCD and it's getting so extremely just grievous, callous and cruel that you physically, well, it just keeps on going. I think that's a very good sign that it's treatment resistant OCD. If it's interfering with your sleep, absolutely, it's a sign that it's treatment resistant. Um, I I know a lot of you guys might think about medication, like why didn't you try SSRI? Why didn't you try medication? I'm gonna probably provide an essay of why SSRIs have a high risk of a lot of problems. I'm not gonna go into this in this video right now, but I think in a successive video I'm gonna really have to start deflecting from my general consensus. Yes, including the right to die. Yes, including many of the other topics. And I've promised myself that if I ever were to come back to YouTube formally, that I would dedicate a lot of my life to helping people with mental illness, especially reaching out to people with insomnia, people like me who've been through hell and back, where their sleep or is literally fucked, and where one of third of what we should be doing, including that's sleep. If you think about shitting, sorry for the profanity here, but I feel but at this point I've just jacked up, sensitized, and very bewildered. So of course, I'm going to be using a bit of cursory words here. Um, what I wanted to say, of course, was that when you are pushed to the point where your life is becoming a war to survive and you're playing chess with your mind every day, every second, every time of where you essentially are alive, you're getting to the point where you're approaching the edge of the earth pandemic and problem paradox where everything you're doing is a fight or flight agenda. I mean, that's how I feel every day that I live and every day that I stand up. I keep monitoring my sleep and I'm wondering, how many hours did I get last night? It becomes to me this dangling carrot that I will never be able to grab onto because no matter how much I try and just relax, every night becomes a worry to me because I'm not sure if the night is going to be. I also have to add that I'm completely unable to nap. Like completely unable to nap. I haven't napped in the last 10 months of this year. I've been completely my napping, my ability to nap is completely obsolete at this point. It's made absolutely redundant. Um, it's been completely blitzed by the inability to nap. I'm physically unable to nap, no matter how tired. Oh, to kind of backtrack as well, to the first few weeks of this year, I was completely unable to nap, even during the point where I lost, say, 2 weeks of no sleep or absolutely no sleep, or perhaps I've gotten 2 hours, 1 to 2 hours per night for around for around 5 to 6 days at that time, and I wasn't unable to nap. I think I only napped like 10 minutes and I woke up. That's kind of the thing with anxiety sleep. There's something they call dead sleep, but that's kind of how it is. It's like when you're very anxious and you go to sleep, it's like there's like a trance state. You don't even sleep. You don't even, you're not really asleep. It's like a trance state, like a hallucinatory state that you're in, like you using psilocybin or something. But it's not like real sleep. It's like it's like dirty sleep, if I can kind of term it like that, where you're just in this asphyxiating, facetious trance-like state, and it's like you can't snap out of it, and you wake up, and your body is sleep deprived. You know it's sleep deprived. You have, just this bolstering red eyes. You have thick undercurrents of, sags underneath your eyes and everything. It's not the same as sleep when you're really anxious, it's like there's nothing in this world that's as bad as that. I knew at that point when I couldn't sleep for 4 or 5 days that there's literally nothing in the world that's as bad as this thing is. And it's essentially 3 months in this problem. I just notified my family that I'm really, really going crazy. I physically can't sleep. I had to stop essentially quit the contract and essentially, end the contract with a very, very lucrative multi-millionaire client. We're talking, this guy is literally making millions, and he was going to pay me quite a lot on this one project. I had to tell this guy, I'm sorry, but I'm physically, my body's failing me. I can't sleep anymore. Um, I'm in a literally, I have a mental breakdown. I can't. And he just told me, just come back to me once you're. I was doing very, very well for myself. My personal business was thriving, literally thriving last year, and I can kick myself for what happened in the beginning of this year. It's just like I've been very humbled by this whole experience. Seeing how somebody was just shooting up in terms of proclivity to wealth just completely just got bolstered at one instance of sleep deprivation. You know, I started a couple of years ago with my personal business, and it was kind of an editing slash freelance writing business where I was just physically doing specialized in niche. I was doing niche specializations and writing services for. Um, it was a power. So we just worked for schools basically. So I did PowerPoint, essentially PowerPoint editing, PowerPoint writing for scout articles, picture deck articles and stuff for people, essentially presentations and uh, you know conferences that I did. So I did articles and deck presentations for conferences, and this was something I was really, really passionate about. And then fast forward to this year, it just completely got lumbered. And since this sleep deprivation started, since my anxiety got completely out of hand, I had to physically put my dreams on hold. That's the problem. Like, I had no other way. Like, I had to put everything on hold. And it was so sanctimonious, if I could use that word, so Machiavellian, to probably use a better word in that case, that I physically, I mean, I couldn't recover from that blow. It was a king hit. It was a right cross to the jaw for me. To use a boxing analogy, that I couldn't regain my footing. I physically couldn't regain my footing, and I still struggle now. And to kind of go back to last year, I was getting really good with AI. I was writing 4 or 5 programs using the OpenAI API. Some of these programs I actually wanted to publish on the OpenAI's platform and database, and I didn't have the time. Hence the fact that I've gotten really, really sick. Um, Mental illness is so taboo. I don't know how much more to kind of exclamate it. um, there's a massive, massive command, command things when I want to kind of scream at the world and say, well, mental health is still a taboo. There's a massive division in terms of mental health as well. People who are chronically depressed versus people who are otherwise having other forms of mental illnesses. There's a massive divide. If I look at mental health, many people would think, if they think about mental health as a generic umbrella term, they think about depression. They think that's kind of the only depression and classic anxiety, which is like, you're afraid of heights, you're fear. That's what people would say. That's what people would think when, or society would kind of class as mental health, the proclivity to be anxious or depressed. But mental health is so much deeper than skin deep when you come to bigger things like, the inability to sleep is one aspect of how ravenous mental health can get. Schizophrenia is one aspect of how ravenous mental health can get. Akathisia, which is a movement disorder, is one aspect of how ravenous mental health can get. So mental health isn't just this idea, this 10% the teapot depression that many people think this is, the struggle with your inner demons as such. Mental health can really grow teeth, and completely it can physically jade your ability, or block your ability to live physically. It can block the brain's ability to, and that's kind of the crazy part of it. It can block neurobiology. It can block synapses even. Like, it's quite crazy. Like, even thoughts that you have, or inappropriate thoughts, can completely just jade or block or jam specific synapses in your brain. It's been shown. It's like cancer. It can actually be cancerous, your thought processes. And it's not all willingly or voluntarily done. Some of these thought processes are involuntary, and it's not something. That's kind of the case of OCD. It's an involuntary process where thoughts are extremely sticky and you can dissociate from them, and they cause problems in your life, and you physically, there's the interventions that do work, like wait for it, are electroconvulsive therapy and gamma knife surgery. I think that's the most promising methods that has ever worked for somebody with OCD and completely just jammed OCD shut. Even even in law of the fact that those methods seldom work. So the corollary to the clause here is that whilst almost nothing works for OCD, the only thing that's actually working for OCD at all is the most slanderous methods at all, and the most interventive methods at all, like gamma knife surgery or electroconvulsive therapy, which I wouldn't even touch with a 10-foot barge pole, I must say, in my lifetime, nor in the life to come. These methods, I would never, I would rather live with my OCD and my insomnia than going down that rabbit hole of oblivion. Like, I would never go there. I have my reasons why not. I think experientially it's becoming, I don't want to become an experiment. I physically don't want to become a psychiatric experiment. And I do suffer. Like, if you listen to my videos in the past, if you're listening to this video, you realize that, I do absolutely suffer from insomnia. I suffer from mental health problems. I suffer from severe anxiety. That's clearly eclipsing my life in many shapes and forms, and there's no way for me to actually reverse it. And despite the fact that I do have anxiety, despite the fact that I do have insomnia, I am not going to go down the medical rabbit hole or the psychiatrical cart, because I know exactly the risk that you're taking. And that's kind of the problem with experimentation, is that you're taking, there's a higher risk that comes with it. And the problem is when you hit the risk, when you go into the casino and you're putting your house and your wife and your kids on the line at stake, and you're losing that, then the risk is just too much to bear. So yes, you can win a lot, but the point of risk aversion is to understand what you're risking and if you can lose it or not, right? So the risk is just too high for me personally. I know that if I were to hit the risk, I would have to live with physical sensations and etymologues that are just too grievous to actually survive with. And at that point, I don't think I would have the constitution to end my life. So I actually don't want to get. So the thing is, because I think anybody that knows me, even on YouTube, understands that I was always somebody, and even until today, who's very, very viviocentric. I absolutely adore this world. I like life. I think although life is suffering, surely it is, there's still a lot we can do about our lives to improve it. We are meant to have positive resistance in this world. Like, we're meant to create changes, and through that, we do see friction is not necessarily a vice, it's a virtue. It's an absolute virtue, because when we have friction, we grow and we become stronger. So to believe and to want a frictionless life is to want to become soft, a soft want underbelly, essentially. That's not the way to live. I have never divulged that that was the way to live and to have the prosperous life. I think the prosperous life is one of friction. I think the prosperous life is one where you do have resistance, where you do see sparks, where you do see changes, where you have to go and walk a mountain to save a river. Essentially to jump at a river to save a child, essentially. And that to me is what I deem as a meaningful life. There's also happiness. There's also candor. There's also scandal here and there. Of course, it happens in everywhere, shape, or form. But that's despite friction. That's because when we are alive, we face the music. And the music is bad or good, high and low, rhythmic and arrhythmic, right? That's just the way things are. But we're also seeing the happiness in this world. And I think that is what many people, I physically just do not gel with people who are depressed, because that's just not my worldview, you see. The thing is, my worldview is one such that the world is what you make of it. You choose to have a better life and you fight for it. And especially if you're healthy, especially if your body, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs is essentially atropically, symbiotically, and synonymously good to you, then of course you can only be um eloquently, grateful for such a blessing in your life. That's just, to me, that is just a gracious blessing. To me, it's just a gracious blessing if you have a body to I just could never understand why people are depressed and can't get out of bed and sleep 14 plus hours per day. Like as an insomniac, I wouldn't really call myself an insomniac, but as somebody who suffers from insomnia, I couldn't ever understand it. It took me a while to get to the point where I realized it's absolute baloney, to be able to have a healthy, beautiful body and to actually be in rhythm, and then you can't get out of bed, you can't physically function. That to me didn't make any more sense. Like I used to be at that point in my life a couple of years ago where I would see myself as a depressed person. But now that I've suffered from insomnia, looking at it in hindsight make no sense anymore to me. Like I think I've had the best life during the time that I thought I had depression or felt bad about my life. And I realized I really didn't have any problems back then. My problems were completely fixable. As soon as I started realizing the venom that OCD and mental health could get to, I started to see the blessing that I had in my life and even still have. And I just realized like how many people claim depression and cry wolf at a problem that physically can't fix because they physically can do so much, but in lieu of the fact that there's so many solutions, they physically choose to be to jailbreak happiness and to essentially trade it for evil. And to me, that is the cardinal sin, the unpardonable sin of this world, is essentially having everything but crying wolf and presume that you don't have anything and that you feel bad about it. And it's only until you lose everything in your life that you realize that you've had it. Because unless you actually lose, you won't be able to register that you had everything in the world, and that is partly why it's so necessary to fail. And I only after I've realized, only after I faced insomnia was that I realized that I had everything already. That I could be happy, that I could really, and that's what I wished for. I just kind of went on my knees and prayed to God and was just like, just give me my life back. I had problems, sure, but I could always fight another day. I had a chance to be healthy, I had a chance to be happy. And now I'm here in my life, and my life is completely different. It's defunct. It's every day is a new day, every day is a different day. I'm sometimes just scared about what things might get to. Although I'm a lot stronger than I was before, and despite the fact that I am a lot stronger at this point, I'm not without my worries, I'm not without my fears, and I certainly have a lot of worries about how things will pan out for me, like whether I'd be able. Everything to me becomes a magical mystery tour. If I could kind of quote the Beatles song, "The Magical Mystery Tour," that album. Um, Everything's kind of a magical mystery tour to me right now. I'm not really sure how things will pan out, and whether I'd be able to survive, whether I'd be able to be sleep deprived or actually be well rested at the end of this year. I don't know. I really would like to get into Christmas at the end of this year, 2024, and percolate Christmas being well rested and solving this problem and a fix a solution. But I don't know, guys. I don't know. I know I haven't actually. I just kind of babbled on and brabbled on in this video. I haven't actually given anything concrete in regards to insomnia, or I don't really have that energy. I might actually make a much more impactful video in the future about insomnia and what I've been through. I just think it was just too much. It's just like it's just too much for me to deal with right now that I can't physically dissect every part and every segue of my months, my many months of suffering from this condition. So yes, I would like to hear your thoughts, and truly, yes, I just at this point I'm just completely ramped, physically, psychologically, and psychically. I'm just ramped, and I'm just unsure of how things will pan out and whether I'd be able to survive and be alright, because it's such a big thing for me to realize that there's really no help available for this, and the help available is extremely experimental, and it's it's not as if you pop an antibiotic, within a week you're gonna get better. It's not the same thing with mental health and OCD or anxiety at this extreme form, or refractory form rather. It's more like you pop something, they give you invariable side effects, and you have to keep trying other things until you find the right thing. It feels like you are essentially duped into a druggery where you have to um spice up the drug lord to be able to get a new drug every week and try and, you feel like you're part of a bribe. You have to keep bribing a drug. It feels just illegal. It feels wrong. It feels illicit. Um, when you're at this end of the mental health, I'd rather not do it. I'd rather at this point focus on my health, focus on nootropics, focus. And I must say, at least I went back to the gym because I completely stopped gymming. I completely stopped exercising. Hence the fact that I was extremely tired all the time. And even now I struggle. I don't want to work out too hard and too abruptly because I know it might completely fuck over my ability to sleep. That's actually a bit of a double-edged sword with the gym life, because the moment you start gymming and exercising, it's kind of like it is double-edged. It's a double-edged spear, because it's like the moment you start working out and you're really going hook, line, and sinker into working out, you can work out too hard and you can physically struggle to sleep. It happens to quite a lot of people. It can actually aggravate insomnia, and because you already are sleep deprived, um, it can actually protrude your health even more, and you might struggle even more to be able to get and regain your footing. So I had to be extremely just tight-fisted in the way I approached my insomnia. I couldn't go and take a walk. I was extremely afraid of it, of potentially getting in a fisticuff or altercation or pugilistic attempt with somebody. I'm quite a confrontational person sometimes, and I wouldn't budge to speak out and essentially speak my voice and stuff. And so it's quite easily and quite rarely, where in the past I got into confrontations with people and I was very confident in it. But to me, the type of person I was, I knew I just couldn't take a walk and potentially get into the altercation with somebody because I wouldn't be able to really defend myself, and it would upset me too much at the end of the night, and I would have an even harder time sleeping. And at some point in my, hiatus, my insomnia hiatus, as I call it, or regression, I just tried to preserve energy as much as I could. I reckoned that I won't be able to sleep, so I had to preserve energy, and I would keep I would keep the room really dark, essentially, and I would just keep sounds out. So I would essentially wear earbuds, to block any type of sound or any type of auditory intervention in my room, or just try and block it out and stuff. Anything that, like, even raindrops, if small sounds would completely just, it will tear the daylights out of me. It 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 made me crazy, man. Like, I tell you, it was an absolute abhorrent, abhorrent, appalling state that I was going through. Um, I have said that, I would make a successive video on this specific insomnia suffering and what I have been going through over the last 10 months. I'm just a bit too overwhelmed at this point, so I probably will have to stop it. I'm getting very